Hello, I'm Nancy Sofin, and I'm a member of the Lexington Tree Committee. Welcome to this presentation on the importance of preserving our mature trees. A primary goal of the Tree Committee is to encourage the retention of large trees and planting using large shade tree species. This is because a healthy large tree provides proportionally more ecosystem services than many small trees, and that advantage accelerates as a tree gets older and larger. I'll spend the rest of my talk unpacking this statement. Ecosystem services, or ecological services, are beneficial natural processes arising from healthy ecosystems. Examples of these are flood, erosion, and pollution control, climate regulation, and even recreational and spiritual benefits. All of the ecosystem services provided by trees impact public health and climate resiliency, both public benefits, beyond the borders of the property where the tree stands. Most of these benefits, if measured, you'd find to be proportional to the tree's area or volume, and this turns out to be very important. I like this image because it shows the familiar visible parts of a tree and also the importance and extent of the underground root system. The branches and leaves create the crown or canopy. The drip line is the place where water drips from the outermost tips of branches, or the edge of shade cast when the sun is directly overhead. A tree's size is often described in terms of its DBH, an acronym for diameter at breast height, which is the trunk diameter 4.5 feet above ground. And you can see in this diagram, lateral roots are surprisingly shallow, mostly in the top 2 feet of soil, and can extend well beyond the drip line, up to 2 to 3 times the height of the tree in every direction. This root structure is common for about 80% of tree species. Some other species have oblique or heart roots, which form a compact root ball under the trunk and are more susceptible to failure in wet soils and high winds. And a few species, including oak, pine, hickory, and sweet gum, have tap roots as shown, deep anchoring roots close to the trunk, which give them incredible stability. Trees improve air and water quality and aid climate resiliency. Roots hold the soil to prevent erosion. Heavy rain falling through the leafy canopy is slowed enough that the soil below can absorb the water before it runs off. Once taken up by trees' roots, which filter out pollutants, that water travels to the leaves, which release clean water vapor through evaporative transpiration. As trees take in air to acquire carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, their leaves are remarkably effective at filtering airborne pollutants, and clean oxygen is released as a photosynthesis byproduct. The air temperature under a tree can be as much as 25 degrees cooler than that just above adjacent pavement. Shade plays an obvious role, but just as important is evaporative cooling that comes from transpiration. Shading of buildings and pavement reduces heat island effects, which happen when solid surfaces absorb heat during the day and radiate it at night, keeping urban or paved areas hotter than if they were shaded. The full benefits of this cooling occur only if tree canopy cover is more than 40%. These very local benefits are cumulative, so contiguous areas of high canopy cover are particularly beneficial. A virtuous cycle is created when these lower temperatures lead to lower cooling loads, which reduce fossil fuel use and emissions. There are emissions benefits to planting evergreens on the north side of a building, where they create windbreaks that reduce heating loads, and deciduous trees on the south side, where they provide shade in the summer and allow the sun to warm the structure in the winter. Through photosynthesis, trees take in carbon dioxide from the air and convert it to stored biomass in their roots, trunks, branches, and leaves. While leaves later fall and decompose, the carbon captured as wood stays in the tree 28 pounds of carbon per cubic foot of wood, or the equivalent of the carbon in 5 gallons of gasoline. And the rate at which a tree sequesters carbon accelerates as it ages. Cutting down a tree both stops future carbon sequestration, and unless the wood is used to build something lasting, such as furniture or a building, the stored carbon will slowly be released back into the environment. I've mentioned several times this concept that ecological benefits increase in a non-linear way with the tree's size. Let me prove it. Here you see 3 white oak trees, all the same species, a slow grower that adds about 1 foot of height each year. I assigned a hypothetical initial height and trunk diameter, and then calculated the incremental increase in tree height, diameter, and volume or biomass that results from 1 year of growth. And from that, the carbon captured per year by each of these trees. First, there's a newly planted 3-inch trunk diameter by 7 foot tall sapling. Next, a mid-sized 10-inch trunk diameter by 25 foot tall tree. And lastly, a century-old 30-inch trunk diameter, 75 foot tall tree. The small tree looks like it grows quite a bit in the first year because it adds a foot to go from 7 to 8 feet tall. But its volume only increases less than 0.2 cubic feet in that year. And that's the carbon capture equivalent of less than 1 gallon of gasoline. The mid-sized tree adds 1.7 cubic feet of volume in a year, capturing the same amount of carbon as 8.5 gallons of gasoline. And the huge tree increases in volume by 15 cubic feet, or the equivalent of the carbon of 75 gallons of gasoline. My volume calculations, which let the trunk as a straight cylinder stand in for the whole tree, are gross oversimplifications. But this is an accurate enough model to compare relative biomass gains over time for different sized trees, at least on an order of magnitude scale. Because the formula includes the square of the trunk radius multiplied by the height, each year a bigger tree will increase in mass far more than a smaller one, and more than planting many new trees. It would take 75 new trees to sequester the same carbon annually as that 100-year-old tree. And if that large tree were cut down, the carbon released would be like throwing a match on almost 2,000 gallons of gasoline. This calculation just considers carbon uptake. An arborist, considering other benefits and the time invested in the tree's growth, would assess that large oak's replacement value at up to $70,000. Once lost, a large tree cannot be replaced through replanting on a time scale that will be helpful to offset climate change. The calculations just shown for carbon sequestration are similarly true for ecosystem services that result from leaf surface area or canopy cover, things like pollutant removal or cooling. You may be thinking, aren't those big old trees at the end of their lives about to die? Trees can live for hundreds of years. As important, older trees are proven survivors. Long ago, they may have started growing in an ideal location. They probably have good genetics. Their height lets them get more light than neighboring trees. Or they may have developed a form that withstands storms particularly well. Whatever helped them live to their current age makes them more likely to endure stressors, such as insects, storms, and drought, than younger trees that are just starting out in our stressful built environment with its compacted soils, road salt, and weather extremes. Trees, in fact, are the only infrastructure that increases in value with age. Other benefits are to provide wildlife habitat and support biodiversity, Any of you who heard Doug Ptolemy describe the 6,000 caterpillars needed to raise a brood of chickadees can imagine that a small tree can't thrive and support that many caterpillars eating its leaves, while a large tree can. And I can't overstate the importance of aesthetics. Humans are sensory creatures. We respond to beauty around us and seek out beautiful and comfortable areas for recreation. Having access to those and the other benefits that trees offer boosts human physical and mental health. And after correcting for other factors, neighborhoods with more trees have been shown to have lower crime rates and higher property values. How should we weigh the relative value of trees and solar energy systems? This isn't my area of expertise, but I can speak from personal experience. Solar panels reduce emissions while trees offset them. And if carbon emissions were our only concern, my understanding is that the math favors solar panels. But we face crises of climate and biodiversity and more. And it often doesn't need to be a binary choice. Whenever possible, the best decision between a tree and solar energy is both. Perhaps community solar makes more sense than rooftop solar for some residents. It may be worth paying for periodic tree pruning or sacrificing some potential energy output to retain trees and the other ecosystem services that those trees provide. I'd like to end by considering some threats to our large trees and practical steps we may take to address them. It's clear to me and others that Lexington is losing a lot of big trees, and not just from construction. And I don't see that trend stopping or slowing unless we do something radically different than what we're doing now. First, it's hard, though not impossible, for overhead wires and large shade trees to coexist. Towns that own their own electric utilities and do their own pruning don't suffer quite the same drastic pruning that we do at the hands of Eversource. Underground utilities have their own restrictions, but don't impede tree planting or growth as much as do overhead wires. And we should be vigilant as 5G is introduced that trees are not sacrificed to ease installation and delivery of that service. Call the tree warden if you see pruning that concerns you around town. Climate change and invasive plants and insects threaten our native species. Bittersweet, an invasive vine that strangles and smothers, threatens trees on both public and private land. Garlic mustard secretes compounds that hamper tree growth. Emerald ash borer has been found in town, and Asian longhorn beetle is elsewhere in the state. Sugar maples and hemlocks are succumbing to insects and diseases because winters are not cold enough to kill the pathogens that affect them. Droughts are increasingly common and severe. So what can you do? Take care of your trees. Water them, remove invasive plants from your yards, be on the lookout for insect damage, and consult with an arborist if you're concerned. If you are planting a new tree, consider a native species that thrives slightly south of here. Anything that survives for a long time, buildings, cars, people, and trees, will develop wear and damage that requires maintenance and repair. Most of us aren't tree experts, and a flaw in a large tree can look scary. Fear of impending failure that may lead to property damage, personal harm, or legal liability can spur people to unnecessarily remove trees that are fundamentally healthy and productive. Proper tree care is less expensive in the long run than removal. Seek an arborist who specializes in tree preservation, not one who advertises tree removal. Our tree bylaw has not kept pace with changing environmental and economic pressures. It requires mitigation for setback trees removed during major construction. That scope is insufficient to prevent the loss of our mature tree canopy. The first step is public education. And it's also time to consider and discuss limiting or prohibiting the removal of large trees anywhere in town. The town has adopted aggressive sustainability goals, but the inclusion of natural solutions that include preserving large trees to reach those goals is not yet enshrined in policy or always carried out in practice. We have seen trees cut down to put up solar canopies in parking lots and sidewalks made narrower to accommodate utility poles, but not for trees. There are creative solutions so that trees can thrive in urban settings, like using easements to route a sidewalk around a tree or building tree wells to accommodate tree roots under sidewalks or parking lots. Most important, natural solutions to sustainability goals should be an integral part of planning on equal footing with built infrastructure from the very beginning of any project. This is true for the town, and it's true for your own homes. I hope that you found this presentation helpful. If you have questions, reach out to the Lexington Tree Committee at this email address. Thank you for your attention.